Um, we're going to start off with a bit of introduction. So personally, my name is Magnus Grimland, CEO and founder of Antler. Antler is the world's largest technology company builder. This year, we will build around 120 technology companies across the globe. And we built about 45 companies out of Singapore the last 12 months. So that's what we do. And this topic is thereby very, very relevant for us. Going to move on to Ankiti. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Zilingo and what you do?
Sure, thank you, Magnus, and thank you for having me here. Um, the apparel supply chain, the fashion industry is infamous all over the world for all the wrong practices, and rightly so. Little children work in factories, apparel industry is filling up landfills, there are lots of middlemen and agents that leak away margins from the industry. It's horrible, it's all horrible, right? Everything that they say that fast fashion is doing to destroy the world is all true. And when we saw this opportunity, it's a $3.8 trillion industry. It's 5% of global GDP. And the main reason that was holding this industry back and all the wrong people were making money was because there was no technology and no digitization in it. So we have essentially built a business across three pillars: SaaS, FinTech, and data that connects everybody from the farmer to the mills to the manufacturers to the brands that build transparency across the whole supply chain, and then we provide financial services and other services on top of it. So that's what Zilingo does. We have over 75,000 brands, 5,000 factories, over 400 mills and fabric suppliers all over the world that supply to brands globally. And hopefully, which is a very small part of the whole market, hopefully we'll do a lot more.
It's very, very exciting, and also the latest unicorn coming out of Singapore. So give it up to Zilingo.
Thank you.
Moving on to one of the giants here in Singapore who probably has done more for the technology ecosystem than anyone else. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure, thanks Magnus. Good afternoon everyone, excited to be here and excited for the conversation that's going to follow. I think just in terms of my background, so I sit within Temasek and I help drive the Southeast Asian Growth Investment Platform. I also sit as part of our global technology, digital media, and communications effort. And I think really one of the most fun parts of my job is finding great entrepreneurs and hyper-growth businesses like Zilingo to invest in and continue to help building the technology ecosystem here in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, give it up for Temasek. I think without them, we would be much less further ahead than we are. So very, very exciting. And lastly, to one of the biggest successes and biggest technology listed companies coming out of the region. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do with C Group?
Thank you, Magnus. So my name is Santi. I'm a group chief economist and part of the management team at C. C is a tech company based in Singapore, but with a regional presence and increasingly global presence. We have three key businesses. One is Garena, which is an online games platform. We do both publishing and also now becoming the global game studio as well. Second is Shopee, e-commerce business. We are largest in Southeast Asia and Taiwan. And today is a very important day for us because it's 11/11. So if you haven't bought anything through Shopee yet, please feel free. I don't mind if you take up the phone right now to do some orders. And if you find it difficult, we also have actually the digital financial services called AppPay, which is help sort of fuel the growth of both Shopee and Garena in the region as well.
Yeah. So I believe this is actually the biggest tech IPO in the region. So give it up for C Group. All right, so we're here to talk about building the next great technology companies in Southeast Asia. So to start talking about that, let's move to the first question, which is building and scaling in Asia. So I thought to kick it off, why don't you tell us a little bit about the major trends? There was just the latest version of the Google Temasek report came out. We'd love to get the top line numbers. Is it looking good?
I think the short answer is yes, it's looking very good. So I think just to lay out the macro backdrop for what we think of as the digital opportunity across Southeast Asia, today it's worth about $100 billion. And I think over the next 5 years or so, that's expected to triple to about $300 billion. So I think the Google Temasek now Bain report has been published 4 times. This is the 4th edition. And every year that number, and the 2025 number, gets bigger and bigger. So the last number we had previously was 240 billion, and today that's 300 billion, really driven by extremely rapid adoption across, whether that's e-commerce, whether that's ride-hailing, online travel, and certainly digital media, online media, and some others. I think that's really the macro backdrop. But then drilling into, I think more to your question around what do we see as key success factors, to build a business here in Asia, and maybe even more specifically in Southeast Asia. And I think the biggest one for us really is for managements and leaderships that have a real focus on strategic innovation. Are they continuously seeking solutions and offerings that matter to their customers? And more specifically, how are they continuing to differentiate themselves vis-a-vis their competitors? Are they attracting and retaining talent? And are they really driving towards flawless execution? Because as the saying goes, ideas are easy, execution is everything. And maybe the fourth one that is less talked about but really quite relevant is, do they have an eye on eventual cash flow and profitability? Cash is critical. It is the oxygen that drives growth in all these businesses. And financial investors, like ourselves, can certainly help to bridge the gap for a time, but we can't do that at scale. There must be an eye towards path to profitability and really driving financial sustainability.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And Santi, you see this a little bit closer in your own company, and also as the chief economist. What do you think the outlook is, and how do you look at this in C Group?
Yeah, speaking of the Google Temasek, one of the findings I really like about the report is around how there's a focus that when we think about the next leg of growth, we have to start thinking about outside the capital regions of the world, outside the Bangkok or Jakarta. That's going to be where the growth is coming from, and you can do that through the process we like to call digital inclusion, with spreading this access to digital technology to different parts of the countries, of the markets of the world. And I think the two ways in which we have been using a lot in a sort of fueling our growth. One is taking what's global and bring it to local, sort of localization of what's global ideas. And the other one is going the other way around, take something which we learn from the local market and bring it to the global market. And let me just give an example around that. So the first one around the localization, I think Shopee e-commerce is a good example of that. Shopee is somewhat different in the sense that we are in 7 markets. We have 7 versions of the apps. We have 7 country offices just to look at it, just to be very close to the customer, understanding their needs and understanding the diversity that is this region, because we like to talk about Southeast Asia, but in reality, it's a very, very different markets, right? So we have to understand the customers. We customize not only the languages, but also the products offerings. The tabs are different. In Indonesia, for example, we would have a special tab called Kreasi Nusantara, which help curated hundreds of thousands of products from different small villages, the craft, the batiks, and all these things into one tab, and that's special for Indonesia. So that's Shopee around globalization, localization, which I think we will probably have more time to talk about in more detail. The other one I want to spend time talking about, because we often tend to overlook this, because when we talk about Southeast Asia, we think about consumers, and we tend to think, let's bring something and localize it. But actually, you can go the other way too. You can go from local and bring it to global, and that's what we did with the games. We've been publishing games in the region for 10 years, and we have a lot of learning through this process. And we took some of the key insights we got from operating games in Southeast Asia. For example, how they're very mobile-first generation playing games, skipping the PC age, how some of the gamers, they may have mobile phones, but they may not be the highest spec of phones. So they need the games to optimize for all types of phones, and also without sacrificing the quality of the game's quality experience. Some of these learnings we use and we adapt to produce our very first self-developed games called Free Fire, which now becoming third best, I think, top mobile games globally last year, and it's still continuing to do very well. It actually become the best grossing game in Latin America as well. So now we have presence in Latin America through the learnings we got from Southeast Asia. So I think those are the two kind of key prompt mechanisms how we do digital inclusion, both taking global to local and local to global.
Yeah, that's terrific. And having built one of these companies yourself here now in the region, what are your learnings, and what is your view on what is required for people to do this again now in the future?
I think, Magnus, the most important thing to think about on business models and how some of the stuff, especially the local to global, global to local, is evolving, is that Asia is panning out a little bit differently than how the large unicorns and decacorns in the West have evolved. And the reason that's happening is because one, everything is happening a lot faster. Multiple use cases need to be built out parallelly. And the way that business models have evolved here is that because the depth of margin in one category is not quite as much as one category in the West, most companies tend to become platforms. And they will become platforms because they have all of the data, they're sucking in all the data from adjacencies and so on and so forth. So whether it is Zilingo doing really a multitude of services for merchants, right from financing to data to analytics to supply chain software, ERP, to actually just doing the commerce, or it is a C Group, which is doing everything from gaming to Shopee to financing and logistics and so on and so forth for the consumer. It's really about all the adjacencies that make sense to serve the core customer that you have and your ability to serve that, your willingness to do it, and the fact that if you don't do it, actually, then you might lose.
Yeah.
So, in the US, consumer businesses have not evolved like that. One can argue enterprise has, and there are multiple use cases in enterprise. But I think that's a very important thing. And this is also critical when you think about fundraising, whether it's private or public. I personally find it a lot easier to explain to, I would find it easier to explain to Temasek this multitude and the plethora of a platform than to an American investor, because they have not seen depth of margins being built by stacking up margins from adjacencies.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting time. I think some very interesting Asian concepts are going to become global, large companies, and we are about to shake things up quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. And you see it everywhere, right? You see it also with Gojek and Grab becoming
Yes,
more
exactly.
super apps. So I think it's very exciting to see.
If I can just jump in, actually,
Yeah, of course.
I think that's a very interesting point, and one that's it's nuanced and not really fully appreciated. And I think it ultimately speaks to the purpose of a company. So if you think about the purpose, and I wrote this down, so pardon me, the both of you. I think we're quite fortunate to have two platforms here that really sort of attack those adjacencies. And if you think about the purpose, Zilingo's, their mission is really, and correct me if I misspeak, to provide a platform to allow the fashion value chain to become part of the digital economy.
Yeah.
And so you've seen really how they've evolved from just a standalone fashion marketplace to really this B2B SaaS platform, financial services platform that has addressed the entire fashion value chain. C's stated mission is to better the lives of consumers and small businesses through technology. And therefore, you've seen them go from just, really just the leading gaming publishing business across Southeast Asia, greater Southeast Asia, and pivoting towards, really becoming the leading e-commerce business and payments business across the region. So, I think that it's a question of how leaders and companies define their purpose, whether it's narrow or broad.
Yeah.
I think that's actually quite an important point.
Yeah. I completely agree, which I think brings us very nicely into the next question is, you have these adjacencies, but you are also in a marketplace where we have 650 million addressable individuals, but countries are quite different. And how do you ensure you get a good product market fit in countries that have so many different characteristics? Perhaps start with you, Ankiti, if you can address this, great.
I think Southeast Asia or Asia is not a real thing, right? Every country is very different from one another. People are different, languages are different, per capita incomes are different. The number of women that work in each of these economies is different, which changes who's making the economic decisions in the household. The languages are different, religions are different, so the food is different.
Yeah.
Now, basically, these are all the things that define culture. And when culture is different, you cannot build the same product for everybody. Now, that has deep impact across how you think of whether it's the UI UX, how you think about how you're making people spend money, how you're making them save money, how you're giving them loans, how you're delivering products to them. For example, in Thailand, it's perfectly normal for kiosk payments to be made for online products. In Indonesia, it would be net banking or transfers. In Singapore, if you tried either of those methods, it would be ridiculous. It would be considered ridiculous. So, so that nuance of the fact that each of these countries and within, within Indonesia, 17,000 islands, perhaps there are many, many subcultures. How you create a product market fit for each of them, you have to think of it. You cannot paint it all with the same brush. Definitely cannot. And I think the biggest and the most important thing is how you think about talent to deal with these problems. So at least at Zilingo, what we do is each of the products, each of the apps, each of the countries and their leaders actually different, and they have sufficient say in how their product and their economy, their local economy will work, because because you need that nuance. We cannot paint it all with the same brush. So in a sense, our country managers and our product leads of these 8 countries are sort of independent leaders who make a lot of their choices within their own individual sandboxes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great to hear. And you were touching on it earlier, something.
Yes.
That you'd also built kind of separate products for each market.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're handling this topic?
Yeah, I think what Ankiti said, is very, very important in terms of the country manager, the local team who understands the market. And I touched a little bit about the Shopee or e-commerce business, but maybe let me talk a little bit about games business as well, because you might think that that's something which is, once you have a product, you can scale up to globally pretty easily, right? And there shouldn't be too much sort of actually in terms of localization in that, but actually that's not true at all. Just to give you one anecdote, we do annual game esport events every year. It's in Bangkok. It's called Garena World, and we just had one this year in April. We had over the course of 2 days, 270,000 people turn up offline, and about 30 million viewers online. And you might think, wow, this is great, grand events, you probably put a lot of resources. Yes, but it's true, but actually it's an aggregation of a lot of smaller community levels, tournaments, games, events that we're doing in both first-tier cities, second-tier cities around the countries, Indonesia and Thailand. And all of that have a grand finale in this Garena World. And the only reason we can scale it up to that much is because we managed to build communities running a lot of these games tournament. And I think that's a very, very important key word today. That's community. Building the community, and that includes not just online, but offline community as well, is very, very important and a very powerful drive. It allows 2 things. One, it allows technology adoption, whether it's games, whether it's in e-commerce, because like it or not, actually your SMEs is more likely to adopt an e-commerce or any technology because your neighbors is doing it rather than you actually listening to an expert talking how good it is. So that's number one. But second part is also we as a platform, as a player, also learn a great deal. When we go out there, we don't just give them education. It's not top down. It's not a one-way flow. We learn about their needs, their pain points, what kind of problems they want us to solve. And that's how we come up and innovate. So in fact, some of the innovation, it's not like we have great vision of the future and we, make prediction that we got it right. It's much more about being close customers and keep listening to what they need, and then essentially just come up with the solutions. But you just have to always be there and be humble to listen to what they want.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. And Wai Hung, more holistically, how do you look at this in the region and when you make investment decisions and you're supporting your portfolio companies?
Yeah, I don't think there's too much more to add. Ankiti and Santi have both touched on probably the main points. I think just to reiterate, if you look at Southeast Asia, really it is a block, but it is not a contiguous, homogeneous region. So when you think about tackling the Southeast Asian opportunity, really what you're doing is you're looking to build 5 or 6 individual businesses, really with, sort of tackling and addressing different religions, different languages, different regulations, different competitive landscapes. And as you do that, I think, Ankiti talked about it very, very clearly, you've got to build 5 or 6 different management teams. That really speaks to the need for talent. So it's quite hard. But I think the main takeaway for us is, do we think that the management team at the very top have the ability to build that sort of 5 or 6 different pieces of businesses? Because I think the key success factors you have in one doesn't necessarily translate to some of the others, which is quite interesting. But the need for localization is absolutely critical. And maybe one of the best examples of this is you look at some of the major e-commerce behemoths in China and the Amazon experience there, where over the sort of a 10-year period, they've really tried to tackle the China e-commerce market, but because they were a little more reluctant to localize the business, localize the website, localize the way they deliver products and the fulfillment logistics, extremely difficult for them to take market share away, and ended up with less than 1% market share.
Yeah,
So that's an interesting one.
It's a very good point. Very good point. And at the end there, you touched upon our next topic, which is, one thing that we look at in Antler every day is fundamentally great businesses are built by amazing people. We're lucky now in the Antler platform to get about 50,000 applicants per year who want to come and build companies for us. But we know that only a certain percent of them will be able to do so. And where do you go hunting for talent, and how do you look at this? Perhaps start with you, Santi.
So thanks. So I think as we discussed slightly a little bit before coming on the stage, is talent issue is something that we think is absolutely crucial for growth. It's actually that secret or not so secret ingredients of growth for all the unicorns and beyond, right? And so we did a study, a collaboration with the World Economic Forum. It's actually the largest survey of ASEAN youth there is, I think, in this world. It's about 56,000 respondents replying to this, completing the surveys. And it's really focused on the skills and what ASEAN youth think about the skills of the future. And one of the very interesting insights was around, we asked them, what are the key factors that would drive you to change jobs? And actually, to my surprise, maybe I'm just too cynical. I thought salary would be number one, but actually it's not. The number one is opportunity for growth and for learning. So the opportunity for learning has become the most crucial thing in a company. So I think that brings me to the second part, where I think there are two kind of strategies to tackle this. One is to really help build and create talents within your own ecosystem. And I think that's something that we put great emphasis on. If you look at, even a member of our senior management today, whether it's just Shopee, with the president of Garena, they all climb through the ranks. They have spent years in a company building everything, working in different departments, and now they climb through the ranks. And I think the key word there is that we often talk about innovation as something exclusive for an entrepreneur, a founder only to do it, right? Which of course they're a very important part, but there's also another very important engines of innovation within the company, the intrapreneur. You need to give them the space and the resources to grow within the company. And I think that's something that we put great focus on. So that's within the ecosystem. But then in Southeast Asia, we also recognize that, look, there's no, we have to admit that there's a talent shortages. And given the pace that we are all growing, there's going to be a problem is going to keep going, right? Because so we have to also contribute to outside the ecosystem. And that's why this year, we celebrate our 10-year anniversary by launching a program called 10 in 10, which is a promise to train and upskill 10 million people in the region over the next 10 years, using programs like the internship programs, using scholarships, using things like going to different regions to actually include all the SMEs and train them how to use digital skills. So all various kind of programs is part of this, because we recognize that this is something very important. And in Singapore itself, this year, for the first time, we launched two major data science competition, for example, because AI talent is such an important thing for our platforms. So we launched, and we have combined, I think, participants of close to 8,000 to 9,000 people participating in Singapore, just to get them to teach them how to do coding from the data, from the basic level to the advanced levels. And participants, are from the students all the way to actually the more senior levels as well. So I think some of these things, and this is the areas where there's a great room to collaborate between private sector, public sector, and education institutions. So I think you have to do it both within your ecosystem, and you also have to do it outside your ecosystem.
Yeah, so you're not only kind of looking for the best and bringing in the best, but trying to contribute to creating the next generation of talent. That's great to hear. Yeah. And how do you do this in Zilingo? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think everything Sati said is exactly true. If I can just add one more thing, which I think he alluded to, which is that when you're hiring millennials and now even Gen Z is in the workforce, money is actually not a key motivator anymore. They want to know that there is a scope for personal and professional development, that they're growing fast. They're all born in the cloud, right? So they've all been born in the 4G generation. They've seen companies grow fast, countries grow fast, globalization, economies change. They've even seen now a cycle of what happens when there's the winds are blowing against globalization in some parts of the world. We've seen some very aggressive movements geopolitically, in technology, and so on and so forth. So they want to know if they can keep growing fast, if they can acquire skills fast, and whether the company they work for can help them do that. So there's one that, which is personal and professional development. The other is, I think, a sense of having impact, right? So it's not just about, am I earning enough money to have the lifestyle I want to have? It's also, am I actually impacting the world, the economy, the sector that I work for? And that brings us back to the entrepreneurial mindset or the intrapreneurial mindset. It doesn't mean everybody has to be a founder, but most millennials do have an entrepreneurial mindset and a beginner's mindset, because they know everything is changing so fast. I need to learn new things every day. So I think one of the things that keeps me up at night is, we have almost 900 people that work at Zilingo, but over 750,000 people work in the network of Zilingo with all the merchants and factories that we work with. And what keeps me up at night is, are we doing the best we can to develop each and every one of those people? And if not, how can we do it better? So I think talent is the most important issue, and it's the biggest differentiator. So we have to keep our eyes on that.
Yeah, that's great. And Wai Hung, how do you look at this from an investment perspective and a portfolio management perspective? Like, what are you looking at, and how are you supporting the ecosystem of your portfolio companies get access to that talent?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. The availability of talent, or rather the lack of talent, is a meaningful issue, and one that we've highlighted in the Google Temasek report as a key challenge for growing the digital economy. And in the context of growing businesses, it's clearly a first order problem. Getting the right talent and utilizing that talent appropriately is probably a second order problem, which I'll come back to in a second. But I think in terms of getting the right talent, we've heard from both Santi and Ankiti about how they've drawn talent and how they've looked to retain talent. I think they've hit all the big ones. Certainly it's in the near term, it's really around whether it's taking it from competitors, drawing people in. The reverse is sort of the diaspora that sits overseas, bringing them back home. Engaging foreign talent where appropriate, and I think they've talked a little bit about how to retain that talent once you get it. But those, I think, are a little bit symptomatic, right? So those are symptomatic solutions. Systematic solutions, I think, really are the ones that we need to focus on. So, which is formal education. How do we build schools? How do we democratize education? Maybe how to use technology and edtech businesses, to really sort of get that education out across the broader demographic, to really build that talent pool over time. So I think Santi talked a little about upskilling. I think that's certainly a big one. And I think an interesting point to note, if you think about it from an Indonesian context, we all have heard that Nadiem has elevated from CEO of Gojek to now the Minister of Education and Culture. And there are folks that said, hey, shouldn't Nadiem really sort of drive some kind of digital initiative within the government? But if you think about it in the context of what we just discussed, it's actually quite a shrewd move. I think there's no one better than someone like Nadiem, who understands that talent is the lifeblood of the digital economy, to help drive that over the longer term. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think the second point is really the second order question is, once you get that talent, is it the right talent, and how do you empower that talent to help you drive your business and help you grow your platform? I think it's a very consistent challenge that we have when we meet with entrepreneurs, because I think when you first start off, you start scaling up your business and you're scaling beyond, let's say, your first 100 employees. Delegation is very easy. You delegate in areas and skill sets and capabilities where, as a senior management team, you're generally weak, and you're looking to really build out your portfolio. Scaling up beyond that, however, that's where it starts to get hard, because you're delegating functions and skill sets and capabilities that, as a senior management team, you're fundamentally strong in. So the ability to actually let go and allow them to run, but obviously sort of maintain the checks and balances. I think that's the real secret sauce.
Yeah.
I think in particular, right, sort of building that so I guess building the workforce, and in particular making sure you do that where you can maintain a consistent culture, that everyone below you has the same values, the same knowledge set, the same passion, the same drive to accomplish the purpose of the company. I think
Yeah.
that's where I think the magic happens.
Oh, thanks a lot. We have a number of more topics we wanted to go through, but I also want to ensure we get to answer some of the questions from you. So let's jump to that. Let's see if I can. Does it come up there? Oh, okay. I'll just read it out verbally then. Question number 1. In your opinion, what kind of companies might become the new tech giants in Asia within the next 5 years? So which will be the next, giants in Asia? What type of companies? And in which areas do you foresee these businesses being within? So that's question number 1. Who wants to start? This is unprepared.
I'll go out on a limb and say 2 spaces. One is content, which is not just content of videos, but it can be content in food, content in lifestyle, content in retail, and content in entertainment. And the other is FinTech, which is already happening, but even deeper because banks are becoming less and less relevant in their original form. So either banks will transform dramatically and become these new age companies, or these new age companies will become banks, what with all the licenses and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, I mirror those sentiments. I think the big 4 that we talked about earlier: e-commerce, ride-hailing, online travel, digital media, digital content, which Ankiti touched on, are all big ones. And I think continue to see continued development. Within e-commerce, we expect to see increasing verticalization, so moving beyond general marketplaces into vertical marketplaces. Similar to what Zilingo has built from a fashion perspective. You may see that come out in beauty. You may see that come out in other categories that lend themselves to a slightly differentiated customer journey versus beyond just general marketplaces. FinTech is obviously one that we think is massive. So there, as part of the Google Temasek report, Google Temasek Bain this year, we've highlighted and sort of built a separate addendum around the digital finance opportunity set, which we think, from a revenue perspective, could be worth 60 billion by 2025, built upon 1 trillion of transaction value, if you will. Yeah. So I think that is something that could be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think for me, it's less about just the business verticals, and it's more about who are the next billion of customers going to be. Yeah. I think who can solve that problem, which back to the first issue we talk about, which I think Google Temasek report also talk about, which is how do you get into those customers. And I think Bond Capital earlier have a report, that this year is quite historic, or last year rather, that because the people who have access to internet just crossed 50% line, right, globally. So that's raised the question, okay, the lower hanging fruits are already picked, plucked. So what about the next 50%? And as you go into the more smaller cities, the more rural areas, I think there are two things in particular that become interesting. Number one is around the communication using sort of pictures and video format, because that could be more accessible for people at large. And actually, we adopt that quite strongly at Shopee. For example, we have the image search function, whereby if you don't know how to type or to put in this product description, you can actually just take pictures of products and you can just search through the apps. We introduced this year live streaming. Very important because it allows direct interaction between customers and the sellers and entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurs, you don't have to be great at writing and describing your products. If you can talk and communicate, you can have direct access and direct interaction with your customers. Customers can see as well what's the look and feel of your fashion products, of the beauty products, cosmetic they're buying. And the second prongs, I think, is around education. And I think this is where, as we go into these traditional SMEs, in say northeastern part of Thailand, or instead of outside the Jakarta area in Indonesia, we just did a report as well in Thailand, just released last week, a couple of days ago actually, where we found that e-commerce provide the biggest lift in terms of household income in Thailand for the sellers based in the north and northeast of Thailand, which is actually the area in which the income per capita is the lowest. And that's because about majority of the sellers, about 40% of them, about 60% of them were just selling inside their own province. But after adopting e-commerce, 80% of them have reached to sell nationwide. So that increased what I like to call sort of the death of distance. You overcome that geographical distance barrier, and that's where the growth potentially is. But to get that, you need to enroll. You have to have the education program, the workshops that we have called Shopee University, which you have to go to different countries, different parts of the countries, in order to teach them how to use e-commerce, teach them the business skills, and doing all this and build a community as we talked about earlier. So I think these are the two key things that going to be the key driving force and key strategy to tackle sort of the next billion problem.
So huge opportunities. The talent is there. The macroeconomically, we're moving in the right direction. We heard here about 5 or 6 very exciting sectors where we'll see very fast-growing companies coming from in the future. You heard from the former panel that there's a projection of 15 to 20 new unicorns over the next 5 years. Looking pretty good, but with great scale comes great responsibility, and we're running out of time here. But at that note, how do you look at the importance of impact and sustainability in what you're doing as you grow and you scale in your business? Perhaps just get one sentence per panelist on that, and ending on that impact note.
I think in keeping it very short, but the biggest impact in our economies will be created by technology companies. 750,000 people work in the Zilingo network. Those are how many jobs and households we're supporting. I think 1.5 million or more riders work at Gojek. I'm sure a similar number at Grab. Their households are supported with financial services and so on. I think our tech companies in the region are changing. If you look at the merchants on Shopee or on Tokopedia, we're changing the economy very fast. And as long as this is good capitalism and not crony capitalism, I think it'll be very deep, very positive impact, very fast.
Great. Wai-Hung, one sentence?
I may go longer than one sentence, fair warning. So I think here impact and sustainability is actually a very core focus to us at Temasek. You think about our purpose: do well, do good, do right, and I think that really encapsulates how we think about the world. And as we think about some of the biggest challenges that the world, not just Asia, but really the world faces, climate change is certainly up there. Climate change is a massive issue. It's one that we need to address together and to address very quickly. But even beyond climate change, I think we're very keen on investing behind addressing food shortages, water, waste, energy, really trying to drive towards a sustainable world. I think the question that people ask when you think about layering an ESG framework over the investment framework is, can we really afford to invest in ESG, and how will this impact longer term returns? And I think that's probably the wrong question. The right question to ask ultimately is, can we afford not to? And I think there have been a number of studies and a growing body of research that have indicated that there's a very positive correlation between companies that focus on some of these sustainability issues as well as overall corporate performance. So I think it is ultimately linked. I think by doing so, we not only save our planet, we save and I think we deliver the right outcomes for our societies. But I think there's actually a very meaningful commercial opportunity set here.
Yeah, agree.
People like to ask me often, because I used to work in economics in investment banking before, so they ask, why did you change to join a tech company? And actually one of the reasons was exactly this question you're asking, which is the impact factor. It's really that excited about the potential impact that e-commerce and digital financial services can have on people. And I mentioned briefly this study we just did in Thailand, and that's precisely why we did it, because we want to understand better what kind of impact we are having and e-commerce is having as a sector on people. So we talk about how it's provide empowerment to traditional SMEs, about people in rural regions. But I will add a third one, which is the key findings of the report, is that we also, e-commerce can also help uncover the hidden entrepreneurs. And there are a lot of hidden entrepreneurs in this region. These are people who are, sometimes they're still students, sometimes they are homemakers, sometimes they have other full-time responsibilities. They may not be able to become full-time founders, full-time entrepreneurs, but because the cost of starting up something on e-commerce is so easy for them, they can experiment and then discover the market and discover themselves. And I think that's one of the key aspirations is to use technology to empower and uncover more these hidden entrepreneurs that they are in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your learning with us. One of the biggest IPOs, tech IPOs out of Southeast Asia, one of the most impactful investors in the world, and our latest Singaporean unicorn. Give it up to our panelists. Thank you all for coming and listening in. And if you want to join them in this impactful journey, reach out to them after the panel. And if you want to build a company from scratch, go to antler.co and we'll help you out. Thank you.